Hello, wonderful. It is Sarah, and I'm here with Kristal Denise Garcia, and she's on our podcast, Toxic Person Proof. And it was really funny because we were actually saying that we don't hate men.
Yeah, not at all.
So many, she's done human rights stuff, work, in the Me Too movement. And it's such a powerful conversation when she's actually a self-love coach now, a transformational speaker, and a dream facilitator. And there's nothing powerful. We may feel powerful when we hate, but there's nothing healed about hate.
Right.
It's when you get past that, it's like, yes, men have hurt me and some women have hurt me. And it's not a gender issue. It's a character issue.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So Kristal, tell us a bit about maybe from your family of origin and how to not hate men, even if they've hurt you. That's a great conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was very young, as a child, a very, very young child, I was sexually abused. And I found myself in the covert sex trafficking industry, incorrectly called the sex industry. I was a dominatrix for 13 years. I was a stripper for 9 years, and I was a prostitute for 7 years. I don't condone that title because it takes the onus away from the pimps and victim blames the women and men who are being trafficked. So that was it for me. I mean, that totally brought me into hating men. I hated men for a very long time, but I began to challenge my perception. I was like, something doesn't feel right, and as I was starting to get healthier, as I was doing coaching, and as I was starting to do my own work, and by coaching I mean receiving coaching. I wasn't a coach at that time, but when I was,
which is super helpful. Sometimes women try to get really like they after something bad has happened to you, and you really want to help others, but then you try to help them so that you feel okay, rather than learning to not be perfect but be okay.
Yes.
And a place to help them. So thanks for letting me jump in there. But I've seen that absolutely. A lot. So I applaud you on that. That autocorrect.
To be clear, I was not a coach at this time. I was definitely not healthy enough. So I was receiving coaching, and one of my coaches was like, you might want to look at this, very gently, kind of pointed it out. And I started to heal. I grew up with a father, so I started to heal my relationship with my father within myself, because that's where I was holding it, and that's the only place it existed. So I started to work on that, and years later, I started to open up, to shifting my perception of men. But I still felt like something was off, and mostly I was seeing it outside of myself. I wasn't fully seeing it within myself, because I would just say I love men, but it's one thing to say it, and it's another thing to actually embody it and live it. So I actually So I started the conversation of loving and celebrating men. I got into the men's human rights conversation and very active in sharing the reality of men's human rights. And I still do that to this day as a human rights advocate. But it was through that journey when I began to start humanizing men and starting to listen to male victim stories, victims, men who had been raped by women, and how our society doesn't see that as rape oftentimes still, and how, young boys are being raped by teachers and they weren't considered pedophile. Like most of the time they're like, oh, had sex with this child. And it's like, you can't have sex with a child, you rape, So all of these conversations, it made me realize that I had been living as a survivor, I was living as a victim, and I did not realize that I had separated myself from society. I had felt like I don't belong here because of all these horrible things that had happened to me, and this is really a man's world, blah, blah, blah. Well, I realized that men were suffering alongside of me, and it made me recognize that I'm not separate, that I'm not outside of society. So it really reconnected me with society. And then as I was listening to men's trials and being present with men in my life and challenging how I was viewing them and listening, not to just be like, okay, shut up, you're wrong, which was what I was used to doing, like, let me tell you how wrong you are now. Thanks for talking, move aside, And so I had to really begin to look at it, and it wasn't pretty. It's not pretty to look at a prejudice. And I had developed a prejudice towards men because of my trauma. And what was happening is I was projecting my past onto half of the planet, which, by the way, is not normal. Like, if we take gender out of the conversation and we say, oh, I'm terrified of half the planet, I would think that that would be alarming and someone would want to find support for that person. But we live in a society that when women say these things, it's like, yeah, good for you. And no, it wasn't good for me. I was living in hyper paranoia that I was going to be assaulted again, or that, all these things were going to happen. I wasn't living my life. I was just getting through the days, and I was just very wrapped up, still very in trauma. So I have complex PTSD, I have CPTSD, and I'll it's something that I live with. But through working through this and healing my perception of men, I began to heal my relationships with men. And that all came from self-love. It all was rooted in self-love. It's not something that I was outside of myself. So when I say loving and celebrating men, it's not like, oh, over there. No, it begins within myself. Because in the way that I was holding men within me, because nobody else was living this besides me. All these perceptions was in me. And yes, I was projecting them onto men and being very unhealthy with men and not even recognizing the patterns of the relationships I was creating and co-creating, and the men I was gravitating towards, the men that I was not gravitating towards. So in this unhealthy perception of men, it kept me cycling unhealthy relationships with men in order to be right about how wrong men were. Woo! And then stay addicted to my victim mentality.
Yes. And something interesting, we always look for shortcuts to safety.
Yeah.
Right? If all men are bad, then I don't have to do the work of learning the difference between a good man and a bad man.
Yes, exactly.
If all of a certain race are bad, if all of a certain job, all policemen are bad. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have used that one in this context. I forgot about that one. 2020, pretend it's 2019 and I said that. All firemen are bad, but whatever it is, we take just this generalization of
absolutely.
Because we don't want to do the work. And you talked in the last time we worked about parenting ourselves and the grown-up work of the's not a mommy to fix it. This, my team's better than your team, this class is better than your class, whatever it is. Being a freaking grown-up. A grown-up, a grown woman. People say, I'm a grown-ass woman. I can do what I want. Okay, here's what you should be doing. Here's what you should want to be doing.
Yeah.
There are, whatever social group you want to say, there are good and bad people within that group. And we have, part of being toxic person proof is recognizing that difference. Because when we say all women are safe and all men are bad.
Right. That's dangerous.
It's incredibly dangerous. It's
so dangerous.
So far from being toxic person proof.
Yeah.
Or it's like people had a bad teacher experience. Well, all teachers are bad. Well, no, they're not. It's a shortcut to safety.
Yes. And often the shortcut people use to safety is prejudice.
Yes.
So,
Yes. Which stems from how we can't work together in every way.
Yeah. And that comes from absolutism. That comes from that perfectionism again.
Yes.
Absolutism. There's no such thing as absolutism. We cannot be absolute. We are human. We have differences. There are issues there. So absolutism just completely throws that out the window. In certain areas, like right and wrong. Okay, fine. Absolutism. But, in as far as like thinking that this is how humans are. So I had to really work through that. And I think, it really liberated me. I was able to I didn't realize, but my body used to cringe when a man would walk by me. I was able to walk free. Like I can walk freely outside now. I just relax. I enjoy, I look around at life. I was like just walking, just so narrow-minded, just keeping my head down pretty much, or, my eyes darting around for the next attack. That's not healthy. And I'm like, I don't want women to live like that, because we're told this is the normal way. It's really not. That's fine after it just happened. That makes sense, and it's normal after it just happened. And there's a time period for that. Okay. There's a time period where, you might have a prejudice for a while after trauma. Okay. But then we have to work through it. So I had to work through my prejudice. And what that did for me was, it opened my heart completely to men, and when I say that, it doesn't mean that I don't have distinction, it's not like some Pollyanna conversation. It opened my heart to not project all of my pain onto every man I see before I even know who they are, you know, and not to project it anyway, but like because I was projecting the story onto every man. I wasn't taking the time to actually get to know men. So in a sense, that is a fantasy, it's a dark fantasy that I was projecting onto men, you know, and I was, before even getting to know who the person was, I was assuming that this is just awful. But at the same time, I was expecting men to fix me.
Okay.
Yeah.
And let's have this conversation, because I see women, they go through something and a man did hurt them. Sure. A man, not all men. And maybe it was 3 or 4. Like, I have total grace and sympathy and empathy. Yeah. That could happen. I don't think you're lying about it, right?
Right.
And then it's like, oh, I need to find Mr. Right to fix me, or find the right guy to fix me. Mm-hmm. And then he'll be magically done so much self-work and be so highly evolved and have no baggage on his own that he has this incredible space to fill in all my holes for me. Mm-hmm. And I don't have to do the work of parenting myself and filling those holes for myself. Like, we don't, and I don't think we consciously think it, but when it's brought out, people are like,
Right. Yeah. And I call it the broken pedestal, you know, and we put men on this pedestal. And what that actually did was too, like when I healed my relationship with men and moved into, instead of hating men, into loving and celebrating men, what it did was it took me out of the fantasy of men. And I know for some people that might sound counterintuitive, like, how could you love and celebrate men? That sounds like fantasy. It's actually not. No. I actually got related to the reality of men are human, first of all. And what I realized is I was kind of treating men like they were these gods. That was the fantasy. I was putting men on this broken pedestal, like, be my God, be perfect, but oh my God, if you fall, I will be right about what a piece of garbage you are. Yeah. Yeah. And so it was horrible. So, but it helped me, you know, in this journey of healing my perception of men, it helped me just keep my feet on the ground and take each man as my fellow human being, you know, and instead of ostracizing men as like this group back, you know, somewhere far away, that's the axis of all evil and the root of everything bad on this world. That's a dark fantasy. You know, we have and they both kind of flip-flop off of each other, you know, the save me prince and you're the devil. So it's like vacillating between
extremes.
The two. Yes.
It's extremes, and it's prejudice. All men are princes. Yeah. All men are the devil. Like all men are blah, 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 blah. Right?
Right.
Now, I ran a mental health campaign for teens before doing this work. And one of the conversations that I found among teenage boys is we're only allowed to have 2 emotions. We can be happy or we can be angry. Anything else society has an issue with. Have you found that to be true in your work with men and human rights in older men?
Yeah. Well, it's because one of the conversations we constantly, I feel like I hear a lot of is men don't share their feelings. And I'm like, men do share their feelings. We just have no space for it.
Yeah.
And so men have learned it's not safe. And they, you know, and there's also an evolutionary piece to this, you know, like when people, so it's something that comes up for me and I'm just astounded at times because I'm like, you know, we have this empathy for women's growth and women's emotional growth, even though we kind of stunt it right now with the stay a victim, that's all you are. But we have an empathy more for female emotions. We and, you know, like for we just have a lot more empathy for women's emotions. But throughout history, and I know I'm overly generalizing here and I own that. So, but men have had to fight wars. They've had to, there's been a certain way of living in order to survive fighting those wars and be able to continue to do that. So there has been a conditioning for men to have to show up a specific way in general. And so now we're here, we're in 2020 and we're like, well, you know, we want men to X, Y, and Z. Okay, that's fine. And again, overly generalizing because men are very sensitive and they you know, are sharing and connecting. But where is the grace to give men that space to now have this place where it's like, okay, we will hold space for your emotions. And are we actually doing that? Because the thing is, when I see men come forward and they get bashed, and I've seen this across all social media, I've seen it in person, when men will share something and they instantly are hit with a reaction. and an assumption. Like I've seen men who share their survivor story and then like immediately get attacked, as if them sharing their story is taking away from women's experience or women having suffered. And it's not. So when we have those conversations of we want men to share, I've noticed that men are sharing and they're trying to, but they're often not supported when they do. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like this catch-22. Share, but then shut up. You know, it's like, well, you know, so that's been my experience in seeing that.
That's just so insightful. And, you know, and having that healthy relationship with men. What are some other things that helped you in reestablishing knowing what men are safe? Because I just want to reiterate, it is not one group of people is an automatic green light or an automatic red light.
Right. Exactly. So for me, like when I speak of loving and celebrating men, that's like, okay, I no longer hate men. Like that's not a viewpoint that I have. So that has shifted into loving and celebrating, which is something that I have with women. And even though I had to heal my relationship with women too, that's another conversation, but having that healthy view, I can come from zero, you know, when I'm talking to a man. Like if I'm projecting I hate men, then I'm not coming from a zero starting field. I'm coming from a negative, like behind, and then that person has to like try and catch up before I even see them as human. So I'm not even humanizing that person. Hating someone is dehumanization. Mm-hmm. So now that I've
glorifying someone.
Yes.
Is I mean, yeah, as Absolutely. We like, oh, she's amazing because she's, you know, telling her victim story. She's telling her truth, yes. Right? That is like also like could get people to let you know, because if they can use that to get you to let your guard down, then you give them an automatic green light too early.
Yes.
Yep. I want to say she talked about starting from ground zero, which in my listeners, I talk about that collecting data. Mm. So if you start with a blank page, you start from ground zero, then you can start to collect data.
Yeah.
If you come into, oh, she's you've already got your script filled in before you see her, which leaves you vulnerable. Mm-hmm. If you come in with a guy and you've already got your script filled in, it can leave you vulnerable and it can allow you to push away someone good.
Yes. Yeah. So that was I love how you share that. And that was a very big point, is any time that I'm going to be, you know, it's about letting go of my expectations. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people fear that, like, oh, well, I shouldn't have any desire. No, it's not about letting go of desires, but letting go of expectations and seeing who that human is. The key point, the number one part for me, slowing down. Mm-hmm. Drastically slowing down. We're in a very instant gratification society, you know, and people want to instantly like connect, but that's not possible.
Please say that again. Well, I think about it as everybody's a yellow light. Yes. If you meet someone new, everybody's a yellow light.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it takes time. We don't get to know someone in 1 date or 2 dates or 3 dates. It takes a while to get to know who that person is. And that for me is like self-love, is having that self-respect and self-care and self-worth to be like, I'm not in a rush. But I had to be in a healthy place to recognize, to let go of desperation. So
because you're not in a rush because you're not needy.
Exactly. And I'm not desperate, you know, like I would love, I don't need a romantic relationship. I would love one. That would be wonderful, but I am whole and complete. I love my life exactly as it is. So if it's going to be a relationship, it needs to be something that adds to my life and I'm adding to that person's life as well. And we're, you know, co-creating with each other. And then it can, but if I'm coming from a space of this inner vacuum where I am going to a guy and be like, save me, that never worked well. That never ended well. And it was the fastest way to get into very unhealthy relationships and, you know, create trauma bonding.
And I want to point out something. If we keep waiting for the guy on the horse to swoop in and save us, you're never going to have the partnership that you want. Yeah. Your language around co-creating a life together, right? Yeah. You know, and people say, oh, you know, when you started dating your husband, did he reach out to you? Did you reach out to him? Did you do this? I was like, what?
Yeah.
We're grown-ups. Like, what are you talking about this game? Like, oh, has he texted me in 30 minutes? Has he No.
Right.
I had a life. Like, I had this full life.
Exactly.
And we just became a part of it. And there was no, we're riding on the horse. We got 2 horses going. People say, I'm not on the back of his horse. He's not on the back of my horse.
Exactly.
I'm not on the horse, and he's fixing the saddle and, shoveling the poop. Like, and I'm not shoveling the poop, right? We both have our own horses in our own lives, and we're choosing to ride together.
Yes. Yeah. I love that. I love the horse analogy. And also, that's a key point element. Like you said, you're like, you have your own life. And that's been integral to me too. I'm not like, like the panic, that all comes from self-avoidance. That all comes from needing to fill the self-love, the inner parenting, because that's the inner child. That's like, pay attention to me. Pay attention to me. Why aren't you paying attention to me? Where are you? And it's draining. I drained the daylight out of the men in my life when I did that, and it was like, I even drained healthy relationships that could have gone in a good way.
You're going to push
it's
away
a
good guys.
surefire way to ensure that there isn't going to be healthy relationships with men. And then that's a perpetual cycle. Men are evil. Oh, look, a relationship.
Yeah.
Attached, the alien in the face, it's like,
which is not sexy. No.
Yeah.
Kristal, thank you so much for joining us. I wish we had 14 more hours. We'll have to have you on again. So Kristal is a self-love coach, transformational speaker, and dream facilitator who has turned her ashes into beauty. And I love that even when I met her, I didn't even know her whole story. It was like, cool, you're a dream facilitator, right? She did not lead with the worst things that ever happened to her. And I want to commend you for that. And I try to do that as well. And, so awesome. Tell people where they can find more about you.
Sure. Yes. You can go to my website at openheartsunite.org.
Awesome. Thank you, Kristal. And thank you for helping us some tips and tricks on not to hate men and be toxic person proof.
Thank you.